I never thought my life would turn into a story that people whisper about behind closed doors. When I first met Daniel, he seemed like everything I had ever dreamed of. Charming, successful, and with a smile that could disarm anyone. We met at a coffee shop on a rainy afternoon, and something about him drew me in instantly. For a while, I believed I had finally found my happy ending. But love has a way of blinding you, doesn't it? I ignored the little signs at first. The secretive phone calls, the late nights at the office, the sudden change in his cologne. My friends warned me, but I defended him every time. He's just busy, I would say, convincing myself as much as I was trying to convince them. It wasn't until one evening, when I accidentally picked up his phone while he was in the shower, that the truth slapped me across the face. A message lit up the screen. "Last night was unforgettable. I can't wait to see you again." My hands shook as I stared at the words, my heart sinking into a darkness I had never known. When he came out, towel around his waist, I tried to act normal. But something inside me cracked that night. I smiled, I pretended, I kissed him goodnight, but inside, a storm was brewing. The days that followed were torture. I watched him lie to me with such ease, crafting excuses, touching my cheek with the same hands that touched someone else. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Every time he smiled at me, I wanted to scream. And yet, I stayed quiet because part of me wasn't ready to let go. Another part of me wanted something else entirely. Revenge. I started planning in silence. I memorized his schedule. I watched his patterns. I listened to the way his voice softened when he lied. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do yet. Expose him? Hurt him? Or worse? All I knew was that this man had broken me in a way I couldn't forgive. One evening, I followed him. He told me he had a late meeting, but I knew better. I parked a few blocks away and trailed him through the city streets, my heart pounding in my chest. He walked into a hotel, not even trying to hide it. Through the lobby doors, I saw him embrace her, a younger woman with long blonde hair, laughing as though she had won some prize. That image burned into my brain. I clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to storm in, to scream, to drag her out by her hair. But instead, I waited. I waited in the shadows until he came back out, hours later, looking smug, like he had gotten away with everything. That was the night I made my decision. I wasn't going to be the quiet, broken woman anymore. If Daniel thought he could betray me and walk away unscathed, he had underestimated the wrong person. And so began the careful weaving of my plan. For weeks, I played the role of the perfect girlfriend, hiding the rage boiling beneath my skin. Daniel had no idea I knew his secret. He still kissed me goodbye in the morning, still texted me during the day, still told me he loved me before bed. And I answered, sweet as ever, because patience was my weapon. I started gathering pieces of his life, small things he wouldn't notice missing. Receipts from nights out, screenshots of messages he didn't bother deleting, even the spare hotel key card I found in his jacket pocket one evening when he left it draped over the chair. I collected them all like puzzle pieces, building a picture that would eventually destroy him. But it wasn't enough for me to just expose him. No, I wanted him to feel what I felt. The paranoia, the shame, the deep gnawing pain of being betrayed. So I set traps. I left small clues for him to find, just enough to make him wonder if something was off. A perfume scent on his pillow that wasn't mine, a lipstick stain on his shirt that I planted when he wasn't looking. Little things to make him doubt his own reality. And it worked. Slowly, I watched his confidence falter. He started checking his phone more often, questioning me about where I had been, even snapping at me for things he once ignored. One evening, over dinner, I leaned forward and said casually, "You've been distracted lately. Is everything okay?" He froze for a split second before forcing a smile, but I saw the sweat at his temples. That was the moment I knew. I had him exactly where I wanted. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. A few nights later, while I was out pretending to meet friends, I came home earlier than expected. The lights in our apartment were dim, the air heavy with a perfume I didn't wear. My stomach twisted as I walked toward the bedroom, and there it was, Daniel, tangled in sheets with her, right in our bed. The rage that surged through me was indescribable. My vision blurred, my hands shook, and for a moment I thought I might kill him right there. Instead, I stood frozen in the doorway, my silence louder than any scream. He jumped up, stammering excuses, while she scrambled to grab her clothes. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply looked at him with a calmness that terrified even me. "Finish what you're doing," I whispered. "It's the last time you'll ever get to." Then I turned and walked out, closing the door gently behind me. But inside, a storm was raging. My plan had changed. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about making him pay in a way that would haunt him for the rest of his life. And I knew exactly how to do it. The shift in power was intoxicating. The next morning, Daniel acted as if nothing had happened. He brewed coffee, kissed my cheek, and told me he had an early meeting. His audacity was almost laughable. Did he really think I would forgive him so easily? That I would pretend I hadn't seen what I saw? I smiled at him, the same way I always did, but inside I was making calculations. I wasn't going to scream or beg. That would only give him power. Instead, I would take everything from him, slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. I started with his friends. I began planting seeds of doubt in their minds, casually dropping hints that Daniel wasn't who they thought he was. At dinners, I'd make small comments, seemingly innocent, like, "It must be exhausting for him, juggling so many late nights," or, "I hope the stress at work isn't getting to him." I watched their curious glances, the way whispers began to follow him whenever he left the room. Then I turned to his work. I knew his boss, an older man who prided himself on loyalty and family values. So I sent an anonymous envelope filled with photos, screenshots, and evidence of Daniel's double life. Nothing traced back to me, of course. Within weeks, Daniel's perfect image at the office began to crack. He came home tense, snapping at me, drinking more than usual. The cracks were widening, and I relished every second of it. But there was still one piece left to play. The woman. The blonde. She thought she had stolen him from me, that she had won. What she didn't know was that she had just become a pawn in my game. I found her easily. Social media makes it simple. Her name was Emily, 24, a receptionist, a girl who thought she was living out some fairy tale romance with a man who promised her the world. I could have hated her, but instead, I pitied her. She didn't know who she was dealing with. One afternoon, I invited her to meet me. I didn't threaten, I didn't scream. I played the role of the heartbroken girlfriend who just wanted closure. And Emily, sweet, naive Emily, fell right into my trap. Over coffee, I showed her the same evidence I had collected, not just of her, but of other women before her. Daniel had been lying to her, too. Her face turned pale, her hands trembled, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "He told me he loved me," she whispered. I reached across the table, touching her hand softly. "He tells everyone that," I said. By the time we left that cafe, Emily wasn't my enemy anymore. She was my ally. And together, we began to plot something much darker than revenge. Daniel thought he was in control. But what he didn't know was that the two women in his life had just joined forces. And when women like us come together, men like him don't stand a chance. By the time Daniel realized something was wrong, it was already too late. His job was slipping away, his friends were turning their backs on him, and Emily had vanished without a trace. He came home one evening, his eyes bloodshot, his voice heavy with desperation. "Why is this happening to me?" he muttered, pacing the living room like a caged animal. He didn't know that every piece of his downfall had been orchestrated with precision. I sat on the couch, calm, collected, watching him unravel. "Maybe it's karma," I said softly, sipping my wine. He stopped and stared at me, suspicion flickering in his eyes. But he didn't dare ask, not yet. He was too afraid of the answer. The beauty of it was that Daniel still thought he had control. He believed he could fix everything if he just worked harder, lied better, and begged a little more. But I was the one pulling the strings. Every move he made was exactly where I wanted him. And then, just when his paranoia was at its peak, Emily made her move. She showed up at his office one afternoon, screaming in the lobby, waving the photographs I had given her. His colleagues watched as she accused him of using her, of lying to her, of ruining her life. The scandal spread like wildfire, and by the end of the week, Daniel was suspended. His carefully built career crumbled in an instant. That night, he stormed into our apartment drunk and furious. His eyes were wild, his voice shaking as he shouted, "What did you do?" I didn't flinch. I didn't scream. I simply looked him in the eye and said, "Everything you're going through, you deserve it." He lunged toward me, his hands shaking, but stopped just short of touching me. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. He realized then that I wasn't the fragile woman he could manipulate anymore. I was something far more dangerous. But my plan wasn't finished. I wanted him broken, not just on the outside, but on the inside. I wanted him to wake up every day haunted by what he had done. And so, Emily and I took things one step further. We started leaving little reminders for him. Notes slipped under his door, calls from unknown numbers, shadows that seemed to follow him when he walked home at night. It wasn't enough to ruin his reputation, we wanted to ruin his sanity. And as the days went on, it became clear Daniel was losing his mind. He barely slept, he barely ate, and every time he looked at me, I could see the terror in his eyes. Exactly where I wanted him. Daniel was no longer the man I had once fallen for. He was a shell of himself, paranoid, restless, always looking over his shoulder. Nights were the worst. I would hear him pacing the apartment, muttering to himself, convinced someone was watching. Sometimes he would jolt awake from nightmares, drenched in sweat, gasping for air. And the best part? He didn't know if the things tormenting him were real, or if they were all in his head. One evening, I found him sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. Empty bottles surrounded him, his hair disheveled, his hands trembling. When I asked what was wrong, his voice cracked. "They're following me," he whispered. "I know they are. I hear them. I see them. They won't leave me alone." I knelt beside him, pretending to comfort him, brushing his hair back like I used to. But inside, I was savoring every second. He was drowning in the chaos he had created, and I was the tide pulling him under. But Emily wanted more. "He doesn't deserve to just suffer," she said one night over the phone. "He deserves to pay." I agreed, and so we set the final stage. We arranged for him to receive a message. An anonymous note slipped into his mailbox. It read simply, "We know what you did. Meet us at the old factory at midnight." I watched him unravel as he read it. His hands shook, his eyes darted wildly. He tried to play it cool, but fear was etched into every line of his face. That night, he drove to the factory, and of course, I followed. Hidden in the shadows, I saw him step inside, calling out into the emptiness, his voice echoing against the steel walls. "Hello, who's there?" Emily emerged first, her eyes cold, her voice steady. "You lied to me. You ruined me," he stammered, trying to defend himself, but then I stepped out from the darkness. His face drained of color. For a moment there was silence, just his ragged breathing and the sound of his heart pounding so loud I could almost hear it. "You destroyed us," I said softly, "and now it's your turn." He dropped to his knees, begging, pleading, swearing he would change. But his words meant nothing. They were as empty as the promises he once whispered in the dark. I leaned closer, my voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't about you anymore. This is about balance." What happened that night in the factory is something only Emily and I will ever know. The world never asked questions, and Daniel was never seen again. Some say he ran away, others believe he lost himself to madness. But I know the truth, and every time I walk past that old, abandoned factory, I smile. Because that was the night justice was served, not by the law, but by the hands of the women he thought he could break.